Welcome to Musikpalast. Today we will take a look at the soundtrack of Final Fantasy Tactics as a whole and its connection with military music. Our main focus today will be on the percussion and the use of the horns as a main melodic instrument. It is common to find in most Final Fantasy games one or two songs linked with the military, since using this type of drumming and instrumentation has proven useful again and again in hyping the player up for battle. But Hitoshi Sakimoto and Masahiro Iwata used this resource extensively in Final Fantasy Tactics. The reason for this is context. The story of the game revolves around the Kingdom of Ivalice recovering after the 50-year war against Ordalia. Most of the conflicts presented throughout the game are either political or military in nature, so it became an obvious fit for the music to go this way. Like I mentioned before, they used two elements to incorporate this type of sound to the soundtrack. The first one was the percussion, and they accomplished this by using drum rudiments. A rudiment is a small rhythmic pattern constituted by two voices. In the case of the snare drum, is the left hand and the right hand. These rudiments are the techniques used for most military drum compositions. As per Wikipedia, the origin of snare drum rudiments can be traced back to Swiss mercenaries armed with long pole arms. The use of pikes in close formation required a great deal of coordination. The sound of the tabor was used to set the tempo and communicate commands with distinct drumming patterns. These drumming patterns became the basis of the snare drum rudiments. This is a list of basic drum rudiments. Let's listen to some of them. Here we have two more that are a little bit more complicated. And now let's listen to some examples of military music. Just like this, in Japan we have the Taiko, which it literally translates to drum. And it was used to communicate orders and announcements to the troops, and also to motivate the soldiers. You can also see in-game that there is a heavy focus on preparing for battle and setting custom formations, which have a big influence on the outcome of the game. The second element used to bring this type of sound is the instrumentation. We are mostly used to hearing classical music, and therefore lots and lots of video game songs which have a higher focus on strings rather than wind instruments. But in military music, this is usually not the case. String instruments are usually not that loud and therefore used in big quantities in a standard orchestra. You might see 30 violins and only 8 French horns and 6 trumpets. Another reason is that string instruments are uncomfortable to play on the move, and since this type of music is used on the battlefield, horns are a perfect fit. Now we will take a look at some examples in the Final Fantasy Tactics soundtrack and analyze how it was used. First, we have the song "The Enemy Approaches." Focus on the drum rudiments and the bell setting the pace. Another example would be "Choose Your Combatants." Starts with a wind instrument playing the melody until the snare drum rudiments start and set the tone. Later, we have the main melody on the horns. Following this, we have Commander in Training. This is another example of a snare drum marking the tempo and then a melody by the horns. And as the last example, we have Night Attack, one of my favorite songs from the soundtrack. Obviously, this is a soundtrack for a video game, and it's more complex than most practical military music. Another thing to note is that we can still find tons of string instruments in the soundtrack, but it's clear that there was a decision made by the composers to tackle the soundtrack with a heavy emphasis on this type of instrumentation to set the tone and place the audience in a certain context. That is all for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know what kind of analysis you would like me to do next. Have a nice day and see you next time.